Welcome to another episode of the Procurement Mastermind podcast. My name is Omid and I've got with me today an incredible guest, Mr. Sandeep Dandekar. He is the head of both procurement and technology of data centers at a Fortune 50 company, and we've got some really awesome insight that we're going to go through today. Sandeep, I'd like to welcome you to the Procurement Mastermind podcast.
Hi, Omid. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it, and the pleasure is mine. So, Sandeep, why don't you tell us about your current position in charge of procurement and data centers at your company, and kind of tell us about how you got there and what took you to this position.
Right. So I work for one of the leading organizations in the field of data center and cloud infrastructure. I've been in this field for about 11 years now, and total work experience of about 35 years now. My base background is mechanical engineering, and after that, I did MBA. And I'm one of the very few people who chose procurement right at the beginning of the career. So I don't happen to be here by accident, but I chose, and that's possibly a differentiator, and that's what keeps me more passionate, more focused, more enjoying procurement. So it's been a lovely journey.
That's actually a great point. And at the end of this podcast, I'm going to extract some secret sauce from you on sort of career insights and how to really leverage and make it to a CPO type position inside companies. So now what fascinated me about your background and your story is, business units and procurement are always at odds with each other. Yet somehow you've ended up in a position where you have both procurement and the business unit reporting to you. You're in charge of both the data centers and procurement. How did you manage this, and how did this come about? Because we never have this. It's always reporting into different structures.
Absolutely. So I will correct this slightly to start with. Business doesn't report to me, but I have a very, very deep engagement with business at the head level. And that still is very, very different than typical procurement. I agree. One of the reasons, in my opinion, is because I always look to expand my view. I never wanted to be only a mundane procurement manager. And that's what I feel is potential of all of us. I have heard this discussion so many times that why CPOs don't become CEOs, etc., etc. Why don't they get broadened role? But I always believed it doesn't come to you. You need to go at it. You need to expand your viewpoint, mindset. You need to continuously demonstrate that you understand business. You're more of a business guy, and procurement has to be aimed to support business ultimately. We cannot do that as a back office function or a support function. So I think continuous display and exhibit of that attitude, that willingness to transcend, do more, go out of my boundaries, I think that has got this additional kind of a responsibility and excitement in life for me.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think a lot of our problems come about in procurement because we are trying to push our agenda down the throat of the business units instead of really trying to understand their agenda and what they're trying to accomplish and coming at it from their perspective, because the company exists not to do procurement, but to run the business and to sell product or service. And that's coming from the business unit. Now, and by the way, I should say, one of the most successful procurement organizations I've ever seen was one where procurement and engineering reported up into the same person and had a set of shared metrics. Now, you're not far off from this because you're running a center of excellence. And this center of excellence has both procurement and the business unit involved at the table together, making decisions together, which is just a fascinating development. Can you tell us more about this and how it works?
Sure. And this is irrespective of sector or a particular organization, in my opinion. Very rightly, Omid, you said that. It must work in like a well-oiled machine in all synchronization with each other. These functions cannot succeed in isolation as standalone, because ultimately we are all wheels of a same vehicle, and together we are trying to drive the vehicle to the destination, which is satisfaction of our customer, which is winning the position of preference in the minds of our customer. That's what we all have to do. So center of excellence indeed is a very in thing in all the industries I'm seeing. And unless there is a very open cross-functional kind of collaboration, it doesn't work. So we do this with involvement of procurement, engineering, construction, operations. Everybody is at the table, and we draw agenda of very very important strategic points which are very critical to drive business on as on now basis as well as in the next 3 years.
Yes. And that's really great because I think a lot of the problems, at least we see with our clients and challenges that we see, come about because procurement is run in a serial fashion. In other words, the end users and the business units develop demand and they do a lot of things in a vacuum, completely absent procurement involvement. Then by the time it gets to procurement, we always talk about well, it's too late for us to influence the supplier pool and to do a bid properly or whatever it may be. But the thing we never really talk about is that it also becomes too late to influence design. And a lot of times the design is then is architected in a way that's not cost effective. And you can never get rid of that in a bid process. Once you say this is the hard coded spec and this is what we're going to buy, it's too late. All you can do is negotiate a better price on it and perhaps get better terms, but you're never going to change the design. And what I'm seeing with what you're doing in the Center of Excellence model is you've shifted it from a serial process to a parallel process. Now, let's kind of take an example of this. This pandemic has been hard on all of us, although, we're kind of on the tail end. We're still feeling the impacts in procurement. And it's introduced a lot of cost pressures for sure, right? And supply pressures. And I think what we all have seen and perhaps still are seeing is suppliers with a lot of bargaining power. Now, it's also put pressure on your business unit because your business unit is under cost pressure from your supply chain customers. So with this pressure coming from the marketplace, meaning from suppliers, and then with pressure coming the other direction, so from the supply side and from the customer side on the supply chain for downward cost pressures, how have you leveraged your center of excellence and your dual responsibility with both procurement and the business unit to drive compelling cost reductions, price reductions? I know you have some good stories here. So can you tell us about that?
Right. So, Omid, it was a very interesting turn of events. We indeed got under a sudden pressure of time and cost both. What Because obviously more customers were migrating with a lot of impatience into cloud. There was a sense of urgency, more volume to deliver. We had our own challenges, which means anything that took X amount of time during COVID was going to take more, but market was allowing us lesser time. So that was one very interesting challenge. The second was market was putting more pressure on the price point from market side. At the same time, the cost side was going up. So we had to do something differently. Just the straight line kind of an approach would not have helped. So we put our heads together. We tried to do a lot of standardization. We tried to make maybe 2 or 3 different silos of what is our end product, to what extent we can do standardization of the long lead equipment, of the low side contracts. You have HVAC and electrical low side and firefighting, huge amount of work with actually a lot of non-standardization until then. So we put our heads together. We did the standardization in LLE, long lead equipment. That allowed us to open a discussion with vendors, trying to give them longer visibility, show them the bigger pie, kind of freeze prices, commit volumes, or at least indicate with a degree of uncertainty that market has. So we couldn't commit actually the volumes, but we could very seriously indicate to them what volumes are possible. That allowed them to in turn negotiate with their factories, their vendors, and cut down costs. So it was an interesting thing, and we still continue to do that. So standardization is very important thing that allowed us to go upstream, do advanced rate contracts, more visibility to vendors, reach out to their senior levels, obviously, because we aggregated volume. We are number one player in the market. So obviously we have the advantage of big volume. So all put together, we were able to cut down lead times also to a great extent, and also the cost pressure. I hope I've
This
been able to
is
answer your question.
No, this you definitely did, and I just want to kind of add depth to to your answer because it's quite impactful to me, and I think it should be to our listeners. What's happened here is that the market pressures and the pandemic created an opportunity because very often business units design things very complex, and that complexity brings costs. And in fact, our institute has found on average 18% unnecessary costs in how business units design demand. In other words, 18% cost that's unnecessary to fulfill the performance outcomes that they want to achieve. And so when you said you put your heads together, you didn't mean procurement putting their heads together. You meant procurement with the business unit, with the data center people putting their heads together, and they became more receptive as a consequence of the supply chain cost pressures. And then suppliers in this market of tight supply and shifted bargaining power became more receptive because customization of demand creates costs for them that are oftentimes unnecessary. Regardless, it creates tremendous costs, it creates lead times, it limits your supplier pool, it does all sorts of negative things. But once you standardize, then it makes business easier for them, and they're willing to cut lead times, they're willing to cut costs. And so you really use this advantage, this pandemic, to your advantage. I hope all of our listeners are thinking about this, that the pandemic is a huge, has been, and should continue to be leveraged as a huge opportunity to, because now your business units are listening. Now they're under fire and under pressure. They need answers to try and respond to supply chain cost pressures. And so the door has been wide open, and it should still be wide open for procurement collaboration. Now, let's get into the next question. Something that we see a lot is we have supply chain customers. That means the people who are the companies that are buying from your company, who are dictating demand. In other words, they're saying, not only do we want to buy this from you, this is how you're going to make it, right? And in your case, that would be data centers. Instead of saying, these are the parameters we need the data center to perform to as we outsource to you. Instead, they're saying, you need to build your data center to these specifications using this equipment and so forth. And every time I've seen that, not just with data centers, with every industry, every time I've seen that, it creates huge problems for the procurement organization because, and for engineering, because they can no longer influence the cost of design. And the customer, for sure, is also asking for price reductions, right? So they're dictating costs and usually introducing cost unfriendly requirements. Yet they also want dramatically reduced price, and these two are at conflict with each other. So are you dealing with this situation? And if yes, what's been your resolution to try and address it?
Yes, very much. You're absolutely right, Omid. And as you rightly also said, this is not a phenomenon that happens only in data centers, but in any business. The larger the customer, the more customization they expect. The larger the volume of buying they have with you, the more customization they expect. Whether it is real estate, commercial real estate, office real estate, whether it is automobile, whatever. I mean,
Yes.
if somebody is buying a fleet of 1,000 cars, 1,500 cars, they are going to ask certain customizations compared to a retail buyer who is going to buy one car in 5 years. So that's a fundamental thing. So similar, no difference here. So the larger the customer, the more details they get into from design aspect. They tell us what they want, how they want. We have to modify our designs. So we are trying to create uh, certain late point identifications of design basis, which means um, design for purpose. Where we call it build to suit. If a customer gives us their more or less 95%, 90% design, we call it build to suit. And we must understand what are the build to suit preferences of which customer. Let's say you have 4 or 5 major customers, 1, 2, 3, 4. Everybody's built to suit preference is different, so we need to quickly understand and adapt to them, which I think we are doing
Yeah.
in an as agile manner as possible. So that allows us to still be able to forecast, still be able to do at least a possible standardization within that side. I mean, we don't have one single piece, because when customers start customization, we get sub-side. But even within that, if we keep a mindset of trying to simplify things, trying to design for purpose, trying to give that advanced visibility to vendors and work with them, it's possible. And I think we have been able to do that to a great extent.
Yes. Now, my understanding of how you've done this is you've really come back to the customers. And as I understand it, you actually have procurement involved in supply chain customer discussions along with the sales organization, which is to me a breakthrough, because I never hear this. I never hear this. You have the procurement actually with the seat at the table there, and then saying, listen, if you want these price breaks from us, let's focus on the outcomes, because after all, it's the outcomes you want to achieve, right? You get in your car, you want it to start every morning. That's the goal. You push the gas pedal, you want it to go forward. These are the outcomes you're looking for. It's what the mechanisms are behind enabling that. At some level become just noise and distractions. And you tell them, if we focus on the outcomes you want to achieve, which is why you're outsourcing, is for outcomes, then we can even bring it lower, right? And this is part of the sauce you're bringing to the table. Now, you told me something else in our pre-interviews that I thought was really incredible. And that was about the scenario where you have a supply chain customer that says, no, we are going to use this exact set of specifications, and we still expect a dramatic price decrease. And tell us about what you do in those circumstances. And I hope all the listeners can learn from this.
Correct. So it's a double approach, two tier approach always. First tier is to try and make our best effort to get the required discounts, get the required reduction and the price point that the customer wants us to reach. So we do all our procurement contemplations, we apply all our skills and try and use all our levers from in the procurement to vendor relationship. If we are able to get the required price point, lovely. We have solved that problem. But there are situations where most of the times the vendor knows that they have been nominated by a customer because they have global relationships, and that's how typically a customer would say, for such and such requirement you must go and work with ABC vendor, and they know that. Now once they know that they are in a monopolistic situation, their obviously behavior, the response changes. Now if we are not able to break the ice and we are kind of trapped between two ends, that is where we have to take the awareness, take the whole problem and take participation of customer. So we have been able to successfully take the problem back to them with open, transparency, explain to them what has been happening. We've been able to explain to them the kind of interaction, kind of exchanges we have had with the vendors and the replies that we received. So in some cases, they have intervened. Either they have done the right messaging to the vendor in turn and we get the pricing that we require, or we have been able to influence the customer, let them understand, the realization we have been able to generate with them. So they give us the markup if required. If let's say they said that you must get it at X price, and they're convinced that despite of all attempts, it is coming at X plus 5%, X plus 10%, we do get a consideration and possibly a commercial uplift from them in that case. But that happens, as you very rightly said, because we work together as a cross-functional team. Only then it's possible.
Okay, let me stop for a second. So let's try and redo this answer if you don't mind, because what I got from you offline was I understand the two-tier approach. The first is you go and you see what you can do. If that doesn't work, what I got from you was that then you say, okay, customer, negotiate directly with the supplier. If you want these hard-coded specs, go negotiate with the supplier, and then we'll have our markup on top. And can you talk about that?
Correct. I think I mentioned that but I will redo that. No problem.
Okay, let's try and, if you don't mind, because it wasn't clear, it wasn't coming out, and the impact of what you did not come across to me in what you said. It did not come. It sounded like, okay, we're having discussions, we solve it eventually, and try and make it more clear. The first thing we do is we go in there ourselves, we make legitimate efforts, and when we see we can't get those price cuts, then what we do is we go back and say, if you cannot focus on a performance outcome and let us reduce the price and the costs in that way. Then, since you're demanding this design, go negotiate directly with the vendor, and then you know what the costs are, and we put our markup on top. Because
Sure.
this is a big aha for the listeners.
Sure.
Okay. Okay, go ahead.
Right. So in such situations, and you're right, such situations are pretty common, very frequent. So we do a two-tier approach. First, obviously, is we try our best using our levers, all our skills of procurement. We engage with the vendors and try and get the best pricing, satisfy customer expectations. There are cases, majority of the cases, I would say, where we are able to do that. But there are also considerable number of cases where once the vendor knows that they are in a kind of a monopolistic situation because they've been nominated by a customer, they also obviously act stiff because they know that they are not having to battle with the competition. So in that case, we have taken the problem back to customer. We have very openly and transparently put the facts in front of them. We have requested them to either negotiate with the vendor which they have nominated, or do the right kind of messaging from their side so that we get the pricing that they want us to get. Or if that doesn't happen, then we have requested them to give us the markup on whatever is the price below which we are not able to cut the ice. So this three-tier approach: one is going back to the vendor, getting the price that is expected, no problem solved. Second is we try and go back to customers, request them to do the right messaging, do the right kind of required negotiation with the vendor that they have nominated, and we get the pricing that is expected. The third is, if despite of that it doesn't happen, then we request them to take that as a cost and give us the plus markup over that.
And to me, this is a huge takeaway, because the net of it is that the cost problem in these cases is being created by the supply chain customer, because they're dictating the exact specifications instead of the outcomes, and which is creating a cost. And then also, it sounds like in this case, they're also dictating the vendor, which takes away from your bargaining power, takes away from your ability to create competitive pressures. And since they're creating the problem, you're making them be a part of the solution, which is, if you're dictating the vendor, help us negotiate the prices with the vendor. If to push them to give us a more favorable deal. And failing that, you negotiate. I know you don't say it like this, but you negotiate it yourselves, because you're asking us to put in a design parameter that's not cost efficient, and we cannot meet your pricing goals with it. So you want this design parameter, you want this supplier, go negotiate it yourself. We'll take our markup on top. I think that's a fascinating answer, because I see this problem with companies every day, where they don't know how to overcome the fact that supply chain customers are dictating not only the outcomes of what they want to buy, but also all the mechanics behind it, which creates a ton of cost problems. Now, one of the really incredible things you're doing is you have shared metrics between the business unit and procurement. And I have to be honest, I've only seen this, so I can recall, I think I've only seen it with one company, in 30 years. Yours would be the second. And where there's, I don't mean sharing and emailing each other, I mean being accountable for a set of shared metrics, where procurement cares about engineering metrics and about the business unit metrics and is on the hook for them. And the business unit cares about procurement metrics and is similarly on the hook for them. And you have this, instead of being us versus them, it becomes essentially us. It becomes a team that's working towards the same objectives. So how can other companies kind of, and you've done this through your center of excellence, right? And also through your role and your areas of joint areas of responsibility. How can other companies move towards this model to get rid of competing interests and to move towards a set of shared interests? But what is your advice to other companies and to chief procurement officers watching this who want to do the same?
Right, absolutely. This only works through collaboration, and more collaboration and more collaboration. And as you rightly said, engineering, depending upon the type of industry, whether it is construction, whether it is manufacturing, production, everybody has to be involved. So let's say if you're talking about a steel mill, then their shared metrics could be what's our cost per ton, what's our price per ton of finished product. Let's say somebody's selling ingots, aluminum. What's my cost per ton, and how am I going to be more competitive than my nearest competitor? So, if we are able to arrive at what is common and very critical to business, fundamentally, that touches the lives of all. Like in our case, we talk about what's our cost per megawatt, what's my cost per square feet, how many megawatts can I fit into a certain footprint of a data center, which means more megawatt I'm able to fit in the same area, the more the better ROI case it is. So these are some matrices which cannot be isolated from the lives of any function. And we have been able to reach there. So we have broken down, let's say, cost per megawatt is what procurement must do, what engineering must do, what operations must do. We have tried to break down those sub KRAs or sub matrices, which integrate into one what is our per megawatt cost. Also in time, if we are talking about, let's say, a greenfield project of 50 megawatt, what should be our turnaround time? Since the time we have the property available to start work, we are able to break the ground. Should it be 14 months? Should it be 16 months? Should it be 18 months? We have been able to break that down into various activities and build a chain of that. Which activities must happen in sequence, which can happen in parallel, which possibly can be done in anticipation. We are trying to figure out all that. And that's our individual KRA, which builds into what's our per megawatt cost, what's our per square foot cost, and what's my build total turnaround time of the entire structure.
Yes, this is great because the types of things I heard you talk about are not the types of things that procurement typically would be thinking about. Procurement is thinking about cost savings and other metrics that they have, but at the end of the day, what really matters is the business unit metrics, because those are the ones that's the reason the company exists, is to make those things excel. And so I think one of the big takeaways for me, and I hope for the listeners, is that procurement, embedding yourself with the business unit, does not mean embedding your agenda into the business unit. It means understanding the business unit's agenda and really understanding, as the business unit is the reason the company exists, what are the metrics they're trying to achieve, and how do we then achieve those things at the lowest total cost. And so we need to be speaking the business unit language. And if we don't, we spend a lot of time trying to understand about the technicals so we can negotiate with suppliers. But we forget about how do we negotiate internally? How do we influence internally with the business units? And you can't do that until you can speak their language and you understand their objectives. And I think one of the beauties is once you start doing those things, then the business unit starts engaging you early. The reason business units, what I see with other companies, the reason business units engage procurement late, the painful truth is because they don't see the value of engaging procurement early. It's that simple. If they saw the value, they would engage them early. They don't. But when you speak the business unit language and when you understand and focus on the things they're trying to achieve, wild horses couldn't stop them from engaging procurement early. And I think that's a part of the success you've been able to achieve.
Absolutely right. And if I may add maybe a line or two, that's why we are involved. Procurement is involved right when we plan a project, like right when we are putting up budget for the project. And that's when we engage so early in the project. And then we
Yes.
obviously are able to carry it through because we have early visibility, early participation. We exactly know what we are planning, why we are planning, and we are able to execute that in a much better fashion.
Yes, and you're engaged early, not because you shoehorned yourself into the process, but again, because they see value in having you engaged early. I can say that with certainty because it's the only way procurement gets engaged early.
Absolutely. And if we only talk about buying price, then beyond the point, once we possibly have reached an optimum point, like all of us reach at some point the lowest possible price point, because otherwise one day it has to be free of cost. So beyond the
Yeah.
point, then we are just scratching surface if we just talk about price. We must look at where can we cut cost, where can we do design better, where can we optimize the whole machinery.
Yes. And just talking about price invites and creates a serial process, which is a recipe for death in this profession. Now, I have a couple of questions left here. What's your advice for those people who want to be on the CPO fast track, who have their sights set on becoming a chief procurement officer? What sort of advice do you have for them?
Yes, think business, think like a CEO, think like CPO. You have to flip your hats and make sure that you become a person with very wide mindset. You understand costs, you understand depreciation, you understand cost of capital. Uh, everything we must understand. Only then we are able to think like a business head. We are able to think like CEO, CFO. And once we are able to change those hats quickly and get that thinking in our DNA, nothing can stop us from enhancing value, raising our stature of value contribution in the organization. And that's
Uh,
when we as a whole team grow, not just as a CPO, but when we grow, the whole function grows, and we get a much wider, much better stature to the whole function in the organization.
yes. I love how you said that because I think part of our problem, most of our problems are self-created, procurement being a back office function and things like this. It's mostly based on it's self-created sort of issues. And a lot of our problems, I think, or challenges, I should say, stem from the fact that we create a very narrow set of metrics that don't reflect the business, that don't reflect what the company is trying to do. And by the time it rolls up to the executive staff, tends to lack meaning. But when you take a very broad perspective, then it moves a long way in the internal influence model that this person is helping us run our business smarter, not just helping us, say I saved this much money on this bid. I think that's a very, very smart approach. Now,
So,
go ahead.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
So I was going to shift to the last question and any final commentary you may have. But if you had, let's say you had in front of you a large set of procurement professionals, and they wanted to know what is your number one piece of advice that what would you want to impart to people, perhaps especially the ones that are earlier in their career? What do you want the listeners to know?
uh, Create differentiators, try to grow, try to upskill, upskill, reskill, because the world is changing so much. So even when you are on a treadmill, even to stay where you are, you have to run and sweat. So we must understand that it's like today being on a treadmill which is running fast. You just have to be very agile. So don't be static. Continuously try to know more. Try to get cross-functional exposure. Make an effort. Try to know finance. Try to understand how business is done, how dialogue with the customer happens, why business comes, it doesn't come. And that's where your thinking will grow. It will reflect in your actions, behavior, attitude, and the boardroom will start consulting you rather than treating you like a head of procurement. The finance guys will come to you to consult, to take an advice, to take your view. The business guys will say, I want to have a coffee or dinner with you. I have a problem and I want your views. So that's what is our potential actually. And many times, very rightly you said, we create our own constraints, we create our own cocoons and remain very narrow. Whereas our potential is very infinite.
Yes. I love that because we only become a back office function if we behave in a back office manner. But if we behave and act and influence cross functionally, it really grows our role. And you're absolutely right. It should not be that we're trying to force our agenda on finance, on the other organizations. It should be that they're engaging us because they see that we're adding value and that we understand the business, and it creates a cross-functional value by us moving together. So this was fantastic, Sandeep. I really appreciate it. I hope the listeners really get some good insight out of this show. And so I'd like to thank you again for joining us on Procurement Mastermind, and all the listeners. Looking forward to seeing you at the next one. Thank you again, Sandeep.
Thank you so much. The pleasure and honor is all mine, Omid. Getting time with you, getting to have conversation with you is of immense value. I cherish that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Take care, and bye for now to everybody.
Bye.